firstly, my deepest thanks for inviting me here. And there are many distinguished senior armed forces officers under whom I have served or with whom I have served here. So my salutations to them. Also many distinguished ambassadors, and of course, a course mate and former colleagues and people from the IDS headquarters as well, which I'm very happy that they are here also. Firstly, a very happy New Year to all of you, and also very happy Army Day, particularly to the Army colleagues. I think it's the finest Army in the world. So once again, I think the best wishes to the veterans of the Indian Army who are sitting here. New Year is generally a time for new resolutions, new beginnings, possibly new threats as well. But apart from black swan events that could happen out of the blue, generally events that are likely to come in, or regional and global disruptions that are likely to come in, they don't start with the new year. So what I'm going to talk about has a past and will have a future also. So what I intend to do is that I will cover the global and regional disruptions, and principally on the maritime side, since that is my specialization, which are likely to impact India. I will cover them under 4 broad heads. I will also suggest a few mitigating strategies to combat these factors. And I think, as is evident, it would be immensely beneficial if the country was prepared to face these disruptions. In some cases we are, in some cases we aren't entirely. But essentially all these particularly issues at the maritime level require preparedness and efforts at a long-term level. It is not a knee-jerk reaction. Just as an example, an aircraft carrier from inception to building, commissioning and operationalization takes about 30 years. Even in the West, it is about 20 odd years. And thereafter it is could be in service for up to 50 years. So it's pretty much almost 80 odd years is the life cycle, if you look at it from that way. It's a very, very long life cycle for ships and their construction. So this is a long-term thing. Since I'm focusing on the maritime side, but the issue also is that since 70% plus of the globe is water, it obviously impacts everything on land as well. Now the first part, I will just do a brief global perspective from the maritime point of view. Globalization of the world's economy has been one of the defining trends since the end of the Cold War. And there was, at the turn of the century, there was a huge hype about globalization, etc., etc. This was largely impacting the maritime sector, because the maritime sector was the one principally used for globalization, apart from, of course, the undersea cables and the information domain that has come in. And they also, in a sense, the maritime practitioners like to say that 99% of the world's data also travels underwater. So in that sense, it is also maritime in nature. There's only less than 1% of data that goes via satellites because of the expenditure that is involved. So therefore, the use of the seas for maritime trade, for communication and resources, since resources on land are depleting, so maritime resources, this globalization led to a substantial increase in maritime traffic. Now this has not really stopped. Even if you look at the recent past, I think from the last, especially I would say the defining time is the Trump era onwards, with the economic nationalism that has come in, the impulse for globalization has declined. There are a lot of writings on that. But despite all that, despite all these factors, despite COVID and the supply chain disruptions that happened, 80% of trade by volume, and as per IMO, almost 70% by value is still transiting across the seas. And on a daily basis, over 1 lakh ships, merchant ships, are plying across the world. The Economist recently estimated to be 105,000, but I don't think it's an exact figure. But that is the kind of volume of ships that is moving continuously. And it is something we take for granted. Even a small village in the Himalayas getting a gas cylinder is dependent on the seas for that item to reach that person. So therefore, this supply chain which is there because of globalization has become quite robust. Despite the supply chain disruptions of COVID, it has become reasonably robust in peace. But in times of conflict or in times of war, there are a number of factors that can affect it, and we are seeing it happen today. Maritime choke points is one of the factors, and we are seeing it in the Red Sea. It's happened before that in the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. It has happened before that in the Gulf of Aden. It has happened before that in the Malacca Strait, and it can happen in many other places. We have seen it happening in the Suez Canal. We are seeing problems in the Panama Canal today. So these are maritime choke points which can, at the very least, be squeezed, like Red Seas. It may not be choked entirely because there are resources to keep waterways open. But when it is choked, you start feeling the pinch, as we are feeling today. The second defining factor of the maritime world today is the oligopoly. Oligopoly, for those who don't understand, is the cartelization, not a cartelization, is a domination by a few of the world's shipping fleets. So today, five companies in the world, largely two European and three Asian, and largely, I would say, out of that, predominantly almost 50% by the Chinese, they are the dominant players in transportation today. So they have the largest shipping fleets. Our own shipping fleet, India's shipping fleet, the amount of carriage of goods by Indian bottoms, as we call them, has declined to about 17%. I had recently written about this in the Times of India as well. And this has come down substantially over the years and is now at an all-time low. Similarly, there is also an oligopoly for building of ships, ship construction. 93% of merchant ships today are constructed by China, Japan, and South Korea. And these are the three dominant players. India has, as I will come to later, has got less than 0.1% share of global shipbuilding. Now we talk about Make in India, but that is the kind of volume that the fourth largest economy has in the maritime sector, the fourth largest economy in the world. So therefore, this is again a sort of a choke point, if I can put it. It's a supply chain disruption we are looking at in the future. Not that it's going to happen overnight, but essentially the fact is that this can impact us at any given time. The other factor we need to look at is that merchant ships are not armed by definition. They cannot be armed. They have armed guards on them which are permissible under the IMO regulations for certain periods, which are very strictly regulated by international law and domestic laws, but they are not supposed to be armed. That is one of the caveats of the entire regime of merchant shipping. Therefore, ships such as super tankers, which can be the size of maybe thrice the size of the largest aircraft carriers in the world, even more than that, have a crew of maybe 14 or 15 people, and can be taken over by just a small boat which will be less than 3 tons, carrying maybe 4 or 5 people with 2 guns. So that is the kind of asymmetry in defensive capability that is available, and this is something that has impacted us in the past. During the piracy time, of course, measures were taken thereafter to strengthen the defense of merchant ships, but it remains a huge vulnerability. The second major trend, apart from the globalization that I spoke about and the impact of globalization on maritime trade and the carriage of maritime trade, it really is what Ambassador Saran also mentioned some time back, is climate change. Now, global warming, is impacting the oceans the maximum, because undoubtedly they are the largest component of the earth, over 70% of the surface of the earth. And so global warming is having an impact on warming the seas. Now, warming the seas, as you know, is going to have, is disrupting climate patterns. It is causing excessive rainfall in places, excessive droughts in other places. There are forest fires. There are all sorts of, weather-related events that are happening on a daily basis across the world. And this has led to an increase in natural disasters. So, once again, in terms of, regional and global disruptions, if we say, I think natural disasters are the most common. They are more common than anything else that happens, than terrorist attacks, and more destructive than interstate conflicts. The amount of damage that is happening because of climate change and global warming is that much. More worryingly, because of the increase in carbon dioxide content and its absorption into the oceans, the acidification of the oceans is happening, which is well documented now, many of you would be aware, which is resulting in the extinction of species, particularly at sea. It's happening on land as well. And so we are now looking at the 6th mass extinction of species. Uh, we have already faced 5 cycles in the past, but the current one is supposed to be the most deadly of them, and the impact of this is going to be felt. I think Ambassador Saran mentioned about certain dead zones in the Bay of Bengal. There are such zones all over the world today. Of course, there are some zones that are protected as well, but the impact on the overall health of the planet is, and all of us, because we should not forget that we originated from the seas. All of us have come out of the seas, and that is where our origin is really. So, and the other impact of this global warming is, of course, the rise in sea levels with the melting of the ice caps. I will give some details subsequently, but this is another major trend that is happening: natural disasters as a result of global warming and the climate change that is occurring because of that. I think the third major factor that I would highlight is the spread of digital technology, digitization that has happened today in the maritime world. Every aspect is digitized: the movement of containers, the handling of ships, the maritime domain awareness of ships. Their ships itself are digitized, the engines are digitized, their navigation is digitized, the communication is digitized. Now, while this is a big advance and has led to many advantages in efficiency and in their maintainability, etc., but also it is a huge vulnerability which has been exploited. The state and non-state actors have held ports and shipping companies hostage with cyber attacks, with planting, so all sorts of malware in them. And this is something that is easily available, as all of you are aware, to both state and non-state actors, and it is another huge factor of disruption that is facing every country, including India. And the fourth factor that I would like to mention is the change in the nature of warfare itself. Now, this is, again, as I said, this is not new to 2024, but the advances in technology, the changes in the pace of technology, the RMA that we used to talk about 20 years ago, this has now, it is not a revolution, it's a increased cycle of change that is happening almost on a daily basis in some cases. Software of drones, for example, in the Ukraine-Russia war is being tweaked on a daily basis based on the feedback that comes in from every single attack. So it is rewritten overnight. The next attack is launched, taking into account what happened, what was the counter used. So this entire pace of technology is something that has changed the nature of warfare. And today, so we are facing something called a hybrid warfare. I think all the senior practitioners here are aware of the term, but basically hybrid warfare has been described as a theory of military strategy which employs political warfare and blends conventional warfare, irregular warfare, cyber warfare with other influencing methods such as fake news, diplomacy, lawfare, foreign electoral intervention, etc. And these methods are used simultaneously across the spectrum of conflict with a unified strategy, using a combination of state and non-state actors. Now, hybrid warfare encompasses three distinct battlegrounds: the conventional battlefield, which is the last which comes into play; the population of the conflict zone, which is almost the first that comes into play; and the international community. And these two are basically through the psychological warfare, through perception management, through the social media, which all of us are on 24/7 continuously. We are on that. Now, we also are seeing that this has now led to another new term called the grey zone warfare. So, grey zone warfare is something which is non-attributable. Basically, state waging a warfare. A typical example, I would say, is the South China Sea, where China has encroached on various islands and islets in the South China Sea, using its maritime militia. Under international law, they are not military vessels, and therefore the other country cannot take military action against them, nor can it be taken to an international court of law because it's not a military activity. Yet they are doing these actions of aggressive actions of overtaking the islands and surrounding them with these boats. And the only option available to states under international law is to approach the state directly, bilaterally. That's what international law allows. So therefore, that bilateral interaction between China and its smaller neighbors is so asymmetric that it doesn't really help. So that is how they've used grey zone warfare to attain their aims. And what is happening is that traditional militaries, which we have been used to serving in, find it very difficult to respond to these conflicts. I think the Indian Army has been facing this sort of a warfare for many years now, and they have learned quite a lot, particularly in Kashmir. But the issue really is that it is very, very difficult to combat grey zone warfare. You don't know who the actual actor is. You are assuming intelligence may tell you something, but all these factors, are alien to forces which are used to standard operating procedures like all of us are. So the SOPs keep changing so fast that you cannot really promulgate them, and therefore this requires much greater flexibility and multiple resources. And essentially, warfare becomes a national issue. It is no longer. It was not really ever, directly or entirely devolved upon the military to fight wars. It was under political direction. But today, that has become even more intertwined with so many other factors, as all of you are aware. So I think this is something that we have to take into account as we go into the new year and the years ahead as well. One more factor I would like to mention is that the destructive nature of wars and the more precise targeting of people and facilities, particularly after the Cold War, a factor has been that wars have been fought largely between asymmetric states. So fights or battles between symmetric countries, which were a factor possibly almost up to the Second World War and even beyond, have actually all but vanished. And therefore, asymmetry of force is a great factor. So one thing that we have to ensure is that we never get into a position of great asymmetry with a rival, because that's when you become vulnerable to a conventional war. The other thing is that wars were supposed to have become short. Now the Ukraine war seems to have disproved that. It's the second year coming to a close almost. But I think that proves the rule. It's an exception. The Russia-Ukraine war is an exception for factors that all of you are aware. But I think still largely conflicts will be, and this would be a lesson for countries wanting to fight future wars, conventional wars, that prolonged wars damage both sides immensely. I think both Russia and Ukraine have suffered immense damage and are likely to suffer more as we go on. So short and swift wars will still be a feature of the future, but we cannot really discount certain battles that will go on for much longer. And the last trend that I would like to mention is, of course, the rise of a new global power, and again, particularly in the maritime field, that of China. Now, as you are aware, the rise of any new global power with global aspirations unsettles the existing global order. That's been a feature now, particularly since the beginning of this century. And while China's rise remained largely peaceful until the ascension of Xi Jinping to power in 2014, now, of course, it has become aggressive, and this trend is likely to continue. In the latest address that Xi gave to his diplomats, he emphasized the need for wolf warrior diplomacy. He said you have to be aggressive and you have to push China's point at all costs. Don't be nice. So that sort of attitude is going to continue. Also, there is a feeling somewhere that China's economic downturn may make it more docile, but actually it's the opposite. So if China becomes less economically prosperous, my personal view, and I agree with many other people, is that it's going to become more aggressive because it has lesser to lose. And I think this is feeding into itself. It is not going to be that economically vibrant in the years ahead, and with that it's going to become more aggressive. And of course, the issue really crux will be of Taiwan, how they handle it, particularly with the recent election of a anti-China president that has happened just yesterday. Now, coming to the specific issues of regional and global disruptions that I think could impact us as we go ahead in the maritime field, I would divide them into three parts. One is the immediate, one is the medium term and long term, and they pretty much fall into the kind of environment that we are in. So the immediate term global disruption that we are going to see and already watching in the maritime domain is the rise of non-state actors and the disruptions that are likely to be caused by them. If we see the data that we have, 95% of India's trade by volume. Earlier I'd given the figures for the world. uh, but 95% of our trade by volume and over 70% by value, it transits over the sea. Uh, 85% of our petroleum products needs, and 50% of our coal needs are imported. Even the 15% that are indigenous oil and gas that we produce is largely almost 11% of that is from the seas. A very small portion of that is on land. Uh, Now, this, there is a feeling that our push for, and it's a very laudable push for renewable energy sources that we have undertaken, and I think that is going very well. But despite that, our dependence on, this is the Ministry of Petroleum's data, our dependence on the seas for oil and gas will double by 2047. So, with all this push to renewable energy, even then, because of the growing population and the kind of vitality that we are witnessing in India economically, this is going to increase. So, the bottom line is that we are going to be dependent on the seas, in the current century for our energy needs, whether we like it or not. That's the way it's going to be. As I mentioned earlier, 99% of the data that we get, and this is becoming an increasingly important part of the economy, financial transactions, knowledge economy, services industry that is there, is also happening under sea. Now there are dedicated attempts to sabotage. This is becoming a specialist field in itself. People have designed specific underwater vessels to sabotage or to steal data from underwater cables as well. And so this is becoming a greater concern. We have already had instances of this in the Baltic Sea. We have already had instances of this vis-a-vis Taiwan and a few other places. And so this is something that is going to come up in the years ahead. The other issue that is really feeding into this is, as far as non-state actors is concerned, is the rise of piracy and the non-state actors that we are seeing in terms of the Houthis. So now this entire issue of non-state actors has been going on for a long time. I think 26/11 was mentioned. That was a major terrorist attack in 2008. Before that, we had in 1992 the blasts in Mumbai, all over the sea. We have seen the LTT war was fought largely by supplies which were sent over the sea. We are seeing drug smuggling of unprecedented quantities today. Just in May last year, the Indian Navy caught 15,000 crores worth of drugs in one consignment. In 2021, the last year that I was in service, the Navy and the Coast Guard at sea together collected $3.8 billion worth of drugs. And if we assume the data that only about 5% of the drugs that are transported are actually intercepted, you can see the amount of volumes that are traveling over the sea. And there are well-established routes and conduits for this across the world. So this entire issue is becoming something of a great worry. The climate change is causing climate refugees, and so all these factors are going to be a huge regional and global disruption. The Houthi attacks, the latest ones, are exemplify what can be done with the easy availability of technology and weapons which is there today. Very cheap weapons supplied by Iran to the Houthis, while the West is attacking them with their sophisticated land attack missiles and the air defense missiles, at the missiles and drones that are fired at them. The fact is that there is a huge asymmetry in cost. So the attacker is firing missiles at a fraction of a cost of what the defender is spending to defend. And therefore, this entire issue, I think, is going to be something that we have to handle in view of the importance of the maritime domain. I don't think this is something that we can ignore and sweep under the target under any circumstance. The medium-term issue that we really have to handle is China. Now, China is in the maritime field is the country to watch. I've studied China in great detail, and my new book is also on China. It's coming out shortly on their maritime build-up over the last 40 years. From 1980, I think Deng Xiaoping realized very astutely that, and which we still haven't realized, that China could never become a global power unless it was a maritime power. And therefore, they have devoted their attention very systematically to building up the maritime power. While every country is sort of authorized or should build up its maritime power, but the issue really is that today the PLA Navy has surpassed every navy, including the US Navy, in terms of major competence. In terms of numbers, at the end of last year, the PLA Navy had 328 major surface combatants, which included 2 aircraft carriers. The third will be commissioned this year. This does not include about 60 missile-armed patrol vessels of the sort that we assume are frontline ships in our Navy. And this is as compared to the US Navy's 289 ships, battle force ships, which include about 50 logistic ships. So what China's figures I'm talking about does not include any logistic ships. Combined with their A2AD strategy, the anti-access area denial strategy that they have laid out for the South China Sea, the first island chain, the US Navy now, which takes out almost a quarterly report on the update on the PLA Navy's developments, has for the last 5 or 6 years acknowledged that they will have a very tough time fighting within 1,000 nautical miles of the Chinese mainland. So this is the congressional report that they present to their Congress every 3 months now for the last almost 15 years. And if you go through it, which is on the net, it makes fascinating reading. The kind of development that the Chinese Navy has done in every sphere of maritime operations, in maritime weapons, the kind of missiles they have today, the hypersonic missiles they have today, are not there even with the US. And so their maritime dominance, currently essentially based on the recovery of Taiwan, has now assumed a global dimension. And they have a very well articulated two-ocean strategy. Two oceans are the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. This strategy was articulated in 2004. What essentially the Chinese have said is that this is the area that we seek to dominate, and this is from the North Pole to the Antarctica. And this is the area which is required for resource extraction and for markets for the Chinese economy. So the issue really is that the entire maritime build-up is exemplified by the Belt and Road Initiative. Maritime part of it is the Maritime Sea Route, which leads from China to the Mediterranean. And they mentioned that in the two-ocean strategy, that the two-ocean strategy will lead them give them entry into the Mediterranean, and of course they only have left out the Atlantic currently out of their entire global vision. Now, the BRI strategy, as was mentioned, has tied down or tied into them intimately Pakistan, the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, though it has been off and on stated that it's not doing too well, but the fact is it is progressing, even fitfully. And the fact is that Pakistan is now firmly tied to China, and their elite are on their payroll, China puts everybody, including in this closed audience, I can tell you that I have personal knowledge of how much money Muizhou, for example, has been paid by the Chinese in the past, during a visit to Maldives a year and a half ago, what was paid. It's common knowledge there as well. But this money is paid, dollars are brought in suitcases and handed over, so the ruling elite does not really have any problem in signing contracts and giving concessions to them. So this has been accompanied, of course, this BRI, and the BRI is one of the aims of the BRI, particularly the maritime side, is to replicate what the British did in the 18th and 19th centuries, is to not physically colonize the world, but to economically colonize it. So their policy is of economic colonization. They have found vulnerable countries. Pakistan is one, etc. And so all this is going to impact us, and this is a long-term game. I think unless we wake up and start taking counteraction, this is not going to sort of change. The long-term part, of course, is climate change. I think I'm a bit out of time. So I would say that climate change is something that is, I just say, like a boiling a frog slowly in a pot of water. So we are not realizing what is happening, and we don't accept what is happening, but once it is too late, we will not be able to jump out. The last couple of minutes I'll take is on the mitigating strategies. I think it's very clear that to prevent these regional and global disruptions from impacting India, we need to build up our maritime force levels. I have given the figures earlier. You know, the EXIM trade, I think I had given 17, I was wrong, that's the wrong percentage. It's only 7.8% of India's EXIM trade is carried in Indian ships. That's number one. 1.3% of global tonnage is owned by India. So only 1.3% of the world's merchant ships are owned by India, and 0.12% of ships are built in India. So that is the but we are the topmost ship breaking country. So so maybe we can take. I don't sort of even want to mention it, but the issue really is the global ship repair industry is $40 billion. We don't even have 0.1% share in the global ship repair industry, despite the advantages of cheap labor and the skills that we have. So there is a lot we can do. Our maritime economy contributes, marine economy contributes less than 5% to the GDP. If we do indeed want to become a developed country by 2047, which we can, the maritime sector will have to more than double its contribution. China has ensured, for example, that 11% consistently over the years they have. So we have to build up a maritime park. And the last thing that I'll mention is to mitigate, as a mitigating strategy, is alliances. Now we have a built-in aversion to military alliances, which is fine because that's a political stance, and it's up to the political class and the diplomats to take that call. But the issue really is when you're faced with a 8-foot wrestler and you are maybe 5.5 feet and there's a very small room, you need to get some friends in. So I think here we have been reaching out. Quad is something that I would like to mention. The maritime, I mentioned about asymmetry also. There is a huge asymmetry in maritime force today between India and China. That's why Quad has been an enduring feature. I think Quad needs to my mind, become, and we can discuss in the Q&A, more of a, not an alliance, but a military, sort of quasi-military arrangement. At least one that will provide greater deterrence to China than what it does today. There are many ways of doing it. The Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Agreement that has been signed is the first step, really, to my mind, for a military alliance. So I think this is something that we should look into, and we can discuss more in the Q&A session. So I'll just conclude by saying that, India has a huge opportunity. We have favorable demographics. We are one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We have a lot of dynamism, entrepreneurship. There are a lot of good things happening in India economically ever since the country was opened up in 1992 economically. I think this needs to be taken forward. With the maritime sector being totally neglected, it's not going to happen. We need to remember that we cannot really become a great power or even a major power unless we are also a maritime power. So with that, I would conclude. Thank you very much for your attention.